Hi all. Last week I told you that the Posh Outdoors crowdfunding pot stood at $317,000. Well, since then, the response has been absolutely incredible, and we're now past the $400,000 mark. I'm recording this on the afternoon of Friday, August the 23rd, so I'm not sure exactly where the pot will land by the time this goes out. But what I do know is it's been a record-breaking week for our capital raise. Outside of the raise, we've placed an order for our first 5 mirror cabins, and they're due to open at our first stunning Rocky Mountain location in December of this year. If you'd like to learn more about joining the investors already involved, then head to the description, check out the Posh Outdoors crowdfunding page, and either schedule a call or email me at nick@glampytex.com. On to the episode. Hiya, sorry, one more very quick message from me, and it's actually an apology. My audio file this week was a little bit off. There's not much we could really do about it. It's still listenable, and recommend you do listen to the episode just because we're really happy with it. And there's some nuggets in there like how to deal with angry guests, which I don't think we've talked about up to this point. But yeah, sorry, my audio is a little bit off this week. It should just be a one-off, and it should be absolutely fine next week. And by the way, I'm recording this on Monday, August the 26th. And I can confirm that the Posh Outdoors crowdfunding pot at the end of the weekend officially stood at $440,000. So we're really happy. Sorry again for the audio, and hopefully you enjoy this episode. Bye-bye. Today is our first ever book club episode. So you've made the cut as the co-host for that. Connor will be crying in a corner somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess we won't get into it. I know the story of 11 Madison Park very well, and it was quite the formidable restaurant, definitely from a service standpoint, food quality. So we'll get into all of it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I invited you on regardless of whether you'd read the book or not, because Nathan and I have obviously read the book, and you can chime in whenever you want. You did say the other day that you'd started reading it the other day. How far have you made it?
I did. Totally. I have not made it very far, maybe like 35 pages. I thought about potentially like doing the audiobook, right? And just like binging the audible book. And then I was like, well, that's not as fun. So has Nathan been on the show before?
Yeah, he was on a couple of months ago. We just kind of, we're talking about Bolt Farm and the stuff that they did. And we kind of went into quite technical marketing, actually, like email lists and shit.
Wow.
So yeah, I'd quite like Nathan on. I had an idea to get him on to like break down like in one episode like 2 or 3 different glamping businesses and what they do really well with their marketing, like whether it's like a pop-up on their website or their mailing list or whatever. But we thought Unreasonable Hospitality would be a kind of a better way to start doing the book club. So we should probably actually say this is the first ever book club episode of the Unique Hospitality podcast. We had the idea to try it. You know, there's lots of great hospitality books out there that can be very useful to anyone looking to get into or already in the business of hospitality, including glamping, hotels, Airbnbs, etc. We just thought it'd be an idea to kind of read the books, discuss it, go through some potential ideas we might have had off the back of it, and hopefully it'll be pretty useful to cover. So we're going to try it today with obviously Jacob and with Nathan Woods from Bolt Farm Treehouse, or formerly of Bolt Farm Treehouse, sorry. We interviewed him on the podcast a couple of months ago. We'll include the link in the description if you want to go back and listen to that. But Nathan actually knows Will Guidara, the author, so that might be interesting. So that's the general concept. We'll get into the specifics of the book when Nathan arrives. Welcome to the first book club episode.
Well, hello.
Hello, people.
People will recognize Nathan's voice. As we said, he was a previous guest. So, Nathan, do you want to kind of give the 30-second bio of yourself? And then anyone who wants to learn more can go back and listen to your previous ep.
Yeah, I am new to hospitality, but nomad, I guess, would be the best way as I examine and figure out exactly my space within this space. But spent most of my career in consumer goods and emerging brands, both from raising money, going from e-commerce to everything to retail, and had a master's in hospitality from more than a decade ago. And after my run at young CPG brands, wanted to get back in the space of hospitality, went into Bolt Farm Treehouse, that amazing luxury glamping resort out of Tennessee. Spent about 2 years there doing marketing and branding for them, and recently have left to focus more on the opportunities to come alongside multiple brands, both in the space that I previously am and then this new space of hospitality. But really focused on how hospitality, the posture and the practice can help organizations in the hospitality space, but also outside the hospitality space to have more impact.
Amazing. And, we've got Jacob on today, obviously our regular co-host, because he is, like Nathan, absolutely loves hospitality, is an expert implementing it. And even though he's only read 34 pages of the book that we're discussing today, he will have some very valuable contributions. So today the book is called Unreasonable Hospitality. It's by a guy called Will Guidara. I think I'm saying his name right. Just a little bit of a bio here. He was a protege of Danny Meyer, who was a famous New York restaurateur, whose restaurants included Union Square Cafe, Gramercy Tavern, and 11 Madison Park, which is the restaurant that Guidara ended up purchasing off Danny Meyer. Danny Meyer also founded Shake Shack as well, so you may have heard him from there. So Guidara was his protege, kind of worked for him. And he came to prominence when he bought 11 Madison Park in New York from Meyer. And he went on to win 3 Michelin Stars and multiple James Beard Awards with 11 Madison Park, EMP. He did that by implementing a philosophy called Unreasonable Hospitality, hence the name of the book. And basically, I think the long and short of it is this is a guy who has been at the absolute top of his profession, at the absolute elite when it comes to service, hospitality, and restaurants. And so he kind of distilled his wisdom into this book, Unreasonable Hospitality, which we'll talk about in a little bit of a second. But first of all, Nathan, you actually know Will, right?
Yeah, we met at a fly fishing retreat for leaders in Montana. I think it was COVID year 2020, maybe 2021. And my group was kind of joining this other group at this lodge. It's called Refuge in Fort Smith, Montana, which is kind of the headwaters, not the headwaters, but the tailwaters of the Bighorn Reservoir, and it's the Bighorn River. And it was one of those, like, I didn't know him at the time, but we were like sitting around the fire, finding commonality in the music we liked. But I knew he was a restaurant guy, but that was all it was. And it wasn't until later you're like, oh, this guy's actually pretty famous, and he's married to a famous person, a famous celebrity baker. And but the cool thing was that as I journeyed into hospitality, or even before I journeyed into hospitality, but really went into this kind of a personal journey of trying to understand the deeper heart of hospitality. Around late 21, early 22. He was just someone that, like, because I had some slight engagement with him at this retreat for a few days. He's just been someone that just kind of speaks to the human he is. So as we get into his book, he has no reason to have to engage with me, because it was like we spent a couple of days kind of part of the same groups. But anytime I engage or email him and any of that, like, he'll email me back and we can have conversations, and I can talk about what I'm thinking, and he's willing to listen and provide input. And so as we get into this book about Will, we can all, and I think as you read his book, you kind of can get his heart, but he's actually a person who's like, he's willing to engage in some with, individuals like me who's just getting into the space that can't really provide him any value. But it's been fun to kind of have that. And then as he came out with this book, it was like the first month or the month prior to me going to work at Bolt Farm Treehouse. So it was kind of a great introduction and kind of to get my mindset right there.
Yeah, and the book came out in 2022, I believe.
Yeah.
And it kind of was an instant success. It's a hugely popular book. A lot of people in the hospitality business have read it. It was even featured in an episode of The Bear, which is a really popular Disney Plus show. And it's just you can see why it's so popular, just because I don't know whether the ideas are radical, but maybe just take things a little bit further than you might expect, kind of standard hospitality, hence the term unreasonable hospitality. So I remember when I read it, it's probably about 9 months to a year ago now. I made pages and pages of notes that I kind of went over before today, and pretty much all of them were thinking with a glamping context in mind. So it's certainly applicable to whatever kind of hospitality business you're in. The other thing I would say is we'll put the link to the book in the description of this episode. I did set up an Amazon affiliate program the other day, so if anyone wants to send wants to let us have 3 cents from each sale, then feel free to order through that book, through that link. But I guess I'd kind of be interested in knowing, Jacob, you might have to skip this one given you read 34 pages, but Nathan, I'd be interested in knowing your kind of general thoughts on the book and what you felt when you read it.
Yeah, kind of similar. I wrote it that first, essentially right when it came out. I think I maybe had it on the day, and that was because I was kind of heard about it prior to that. For me at the time, and even to this day, it's the one book, regardless of who I'm talking to and regardless of what service or type of business I'm like, just read this, because I think it opens your eyes to just being a little bit more purposeful with how you engage the people that you get to engage with on a daily basis. And so whether it is true hospitality like Will is in, or that we're all in, or you're in the service business, or you're in consumer goods and CPG, or you're just a leader of people, I think there's just so much, the way he wrote it, the stories he told, the examples and ways he gets into different details of how they did things, I think just opens this lens to the bigger theme of just how we make people feel is way more important than what we actually do. And I think just that framework, that opening up that lens into that, is where the value of this book came, outside of the very practical hospitality insights, tricks, tips and tricks.
Yeah, and on the practical side, I think it's an absolute Bible for anyone who wants to implement the high touch hospitality model. Last week we had Irene Wood on to compare and contrast her high touch model with Ben Wolf's kind of more hands-off model. And I think particularly if you're looking at being that operator who meets and greets the guests, has staff milling around the site, then this could be absolute gold, because you will have the staff to implement unreasonable hospitality to your guests. But as Nathan says, it's more than just applying it to your guests, it's also applying it to your team. There's a fairly lengthy section of the book that goes through how hospitality isn't just what you do for your guests, it's you have to be hospitable to your team as well and go the extra mile for them, and that really allows them to go the extra mile for your guests and clients, or whatever it may be. And that's really what elevated 11 Madison Park to the 3 Michelin Star status. Is Guidara couldn't do it all himself. He had to have the team below him that could implement it, and the only way he was going to implement it is by showing those principles to them as well, so that they can go in and apply it in their day-to-day life. So
I was going to say, and kind of continue on that, how they go from 50 to 1 is at that point, all the food is phenomenal. If you're in the top 50 of a restaurant, your food is phenomenal. And speaking to the glamping world, you get to a spot, it's your accommodations can only go so far to be that much different. I think the interesting thing about glamping is you can have a completely different natural setting that kind of sets you apart. But ultimately there's this next layer that can really take you to the next level, to get repeat guests, to get the reviews, to get the people talking about it. And oftentimes it comes down to the moments of engagement and touch points that you have with them and with your team that make them feel value, welcomed, heard.
I think it's important he calls it out that hospitality is a selfish pleasure, right? It feels good or great to make other people feel good, and that the natural human desire is just to be taken care of, and that never goes away, right? So it's just if you're tapping into those things or just using that lens, that sets the table, quote unquote, for Danny Meyer's book, for kind of what he speaks to and his philosophy.
Yeah, and what you said, Nathan, about it's beyond the food, is I was actually really surprised there was barely any mention of food in this book, considering it's the premise is a fine dining restaurant. I don't know how his business partner and chef felt about the lack of food mentioned, but yeah, this is very much kind of it's set in a restaurant, but it's applicable everywhere. And yeah, that's how the book opens. Really, we'll kind of what Jacob said there is, it's about, he calls it a little secret, is that hospitality is a selfish pleasure. It feels good to give, and you kind of got to get into that mindset to really kind of take it to the next level. But before we get into the specifics of the book, I think it probably helps to define what is meant by unreasonable hospitality. I think you start doing that by defining what hospitality is. And Jacob, you actually gave this quote the other day. He said in the book at the start, service is black and white, hospitality is colour. It's more than just putting plates on a table or showing guests their accommodation. It's bringing that colour into the stay, bringing that magic and making them feel something. And then the unreasonable part is essentially just going the extra mile, being hospitable to kind of an unreasonable degree. So I've used the example before of the hot dog story of Guidara kind of heard one of his dinner guests saying they had a perfect trip in New York. The only thing that they didn't do that they wish they could have done is get a hot dog from a hot dog stand. And he heard that, sent someone to go and get a hot dog from a hot dog stand, brought it back for the chef to gourmet it up, and then presented it to the guests. And that obviously makes the guests feel heard. That brings the colour and the magic, and makes the whole night. And in the glamping case, it would make the whole stay. And Jacob, obviously, last week we spoke about, or it might have been 2-3 weeks ago now, we spoke about your version of that story of the Gatorade.
Yeah, it's just like, and I think this is mentioned in a couple of the first 35 pages, but just like, I think just always listening, right? Just like having your ears open. But my example is that, like, walking through the restaurant last month, I heard this kid say, "Hey, Mom, do they have Gatorade?" Like, because she was asking what they were going to want to drink. And obviously, like, our resort restaurant doesn't put Gatorade on the dinner menu, not even on the kids' menu. But I knew we had tons of Gatorade downstairs at the cafe, which had closed. So, like, I didn't approach the table. I just bombed down to the cafe, like, with so much glee, got this kid this blue Gatorade and came back, made his brother a little jealous, and then went back down and got the brother one as well. But that's just like something simple that it's just like, from a cost of goods standpoint, it's, it's the same. It doesn't matter. You do your transfer slip. It goes from the cafe to the restaurant. It gets, it's fine. I say those accounting principles because I think that, like, that blocks a lot of people from being able to do something where they're just like, if there's like another layer, if there's a barrier to record this, or there's this, like, and this will lead into reevaluating your policies, right? But listening is so much a part of that. But yeah, I made that kid's day with the blue Gatorade. And that's it.
You said, accounting gets in the way, presumably because, maybe there isn't a budget for, I mean, Gatorade is obviously a small expense, but I think, as I said, Guidara's mentor, Danny Meyer, his book, Setting the Table, I think he told a similar story of, I think there was a German family that were disappointed they couldn't stay playing in the snow. It had been snowing and they couldn't go sledging or something. And he sent out a car to take them to the nearest hill to go in toboggan down or sledge down. And presumably calling a car to go and take someone to a hill isn't within an accountant's budget, but if you leave room within it to be like, okay, here's the surprise and delight budget, or here's the unreasonable hospitality budget, then you can maybe get past that kind of roadblock.
And that's what Auberge does as a brand. I have my own activities budget, right? Like, I do have a budget in which it's not as big as I'd like it to be, since I just got on the team in April. So it is budget season right now, and I will be asking for more. But it's there, and I don't know of any other luxury brands that dedicate a person in my position plus its own budget and P&L directly related to activities and experiences, comp services, whatever that looks like.
And I'm sure, like, it's all staying on the budget, like the smaller, more versatile you are because you are independent, you are boutique, you are independent. You obviously have the more the flexibility as you go into the places, even like you said, a more of a established business that you have. It gets harder and harder because there's just policies and procedures that have to be in place when you're at that, multi-unit or multi-property place that just require that. But at the same time,
And that's where the unreasonable will come in. It's just like challenge your
Yeah.
policies a little bit. Yeah, but I understand as someone who's had to adhere policies and also create policies, the why will sometimes get in front of and be a barrier to the magic of it all.
Well, now we mentioned the topic of budget. My first idea, we're going to just discuss the ideas and takeaways we had from the book, and I've got one related to budget. But just before we start, Nathan, did you have any more thoughts on what unreasonable hospitality is and how it's defined? Or
I mean, another way that I've kind of heard it said, and it's, I've heard it from podcasts because I haven't engaged with them, but John Marsh with Marsh Collective, who's out of Oklahoma. I think we've all maybe seen or heard him on a podcast, but he goes into small towns and does restorative projects in real estate, and generally is adding a hospitality component to it. And one of the things he said, and I think he was talking about his wife, but how he explained hospitality, which I've loved, and I think it fits within this theme of unreasonable hospitality, is thinking of you before you got here. And just that idea of you're just spending a little bit more time thinking about your guest before they show up, knowing that, and I think we've talked about before, like hospitality starts well before you're actually servicing them, and what you can do to engage and think about them just a little bit more before they show up into your business, into your property, into your restaurant. And I think, again, my biggest takeaway from this book is really just that zoom out just a little bit more to think about how you can provide that experience that's going to help people feel that welcomeness and that value.
perfect. And to tee things off from zooming out to zooming in, my first takeaway from this, and it's a takeaway actually included in the 75 episode special Connor and I did, where we kind of went through the main takeaways we've had from the podcast. So we'll recycle it, but add a little bit of different context to it. So the what I'd call it is the little touches mean the most. And I'll start with a quote from the book. I think he was kind of espousing his general principles for when he's building a restaurant or a hospitality experience. And he said, manage 95% of your business down to the penny, spend the last 5% foolishly. And I think, well, the example he actually gave was he was working at the Museum of Modern Art restaurant. They had a gelato cart. And he said, this 95 to 5 rule was affirmed for me one afternoon when I watched Glenn Lowry, the head of the museum, buy gelato for a group of visiting curators. Every single one of them spent a second or two admiring the spoons. I'd like to think some museum goers went back to the cart for seconds just because they loved that spoon. And I think the story was, they spent a lot of money on these fancy spoons, which again would never have got past the accounting department if they didn't have that kind of license to go a little bit crazy. They looked after their budget in all other aspects, and then they identified, okay, we're going to go mad on the spoons. And obviously it doesn't have to be the spoons. It might be a specific part of a glamping unit. It might be an entrance feature at your unique stay, whatever it may be. And I think it's just knowing what kind of is going to grab the attention, be memorable for your guests, and then going mad on it, whether it's financially and spending a load of money or just crafting a real experience around it. It doesn't have to cost any money. And I think, those little touches, the guests will forget 99% of your stay realistically. And it's what are they going to remember? And then how do you kind of maximize that so that it will stick with them forever? And I think kind of that little touches mean the most. Spending money on the last 5%, I think is a pretty good takeaway from the book.
I was going to say, kind of in the same way of like being very diligent in the P&L, the other phrase. What I love about this book is there's so many little phrases that either he brings or he brought in from someone else that mentored him. But the one that's very about budget, it's kind of similar, like to be very, very focused on part of your budget is when he talks about raindrops makes oceans. Like it's easy to let your budget on certain things just kind of like add up and add up and add up, and all of a sudden you're in this hole. But that idea of like being so in order to have the 95 and the 5, you have to be so diligent focusing on where everything is going so that you actually have that 5%. But that idea of raindrops make oceans, which also like for like the good, like, hey, little things can make great things, but it kind of staying in the budget idea that raindrops make oceans is, I think, required to kind of have in the mind when you're trying to focus on your 95.5% idea.
Yeah, and you're also like doing this mental gymnastics in real time of like a risk assessment, right? Like risk as in budget risk when you're like kind of going through these filters. But I think Jim Collins talks about this, Nick, where he goes like throw darts first and then throw the cannonball, right? Like that's another way that you can think about the details is that like if your darts are hitting the target, your cannonball is going to hit the target. So whether that's more financial resources or more activities or programming or service level or whatever you're doing, you should be responding with these kind of small darts first and then bring the house.
I think there's a couple of, to give a glamping context to the little touches mean the most. I'll bring back two examples that I've discussed in the last few episodes. Actually, we've got Big Noel Dutson's glamping golden hour, where this isn't him spending loads of money on the 5%, but it's him understanding what the 5% is and maximizing it. He thinks that the key part of a guest stay is that first sunset on the night they arrive. And he does not want the guests to be leaving the site that evening. He wants everything to be taken care of so that they're enjoying the sunset, enjoying the Milky Way. And that's really kind of the core defining memory of the whole stay. So he wants to get it right. And so all he does is he makes sure that there's food available on the first night so that they don't have to leave the site to get it. And then we talked about it again a couple of weeks ago, is creating the space to allow for the experience to happen. And I think he's pinpointed a specific part of his stay that people are going to remember, and he's really honed in on it and focused on it. And I think that's kind of a perfect example of the 95-5 principle, even if it doesn't necessarily involve the financial aspect.
One of the things that we did at Bolt Farm that we brought on, that is one of the it kind of almost takes the hot dog example, but also to this, was we made these reconnection kind of conversation starters and branded them. And we ended up we thought initially they'd just be there for sale or whatever, but we ended up just like anytime a guest checked in, this was in their room. And sometimes they would have bottles of champagne. Sometimes they would have other fancier things that took a lot more time and effort that probably were way more than expensive. These things cost like $2. And once we started rolling them out, like the amount of social content that we saw were about the cards, or reviews that mentioned the cards versus the wine, the champagne, the fancier things. And yet these were a $2 item that we, kind of took from that 5%. But it was this that had the impact. And I'd like to say it was kind of led because we read this book as a team. And we just thought, man, this is for what our goal was at the resort or the property, was like, we want couples to reconnect. Why are we focused on all these things? These are the things that are helping them reconnect.
Well, it's kind of what Jacob said. You've thrown the darts, you've tried the champagne, the wine, the conversation cards, and then you've seen what's landed, and then you've thrown the cannonball and you've doubled down on it. It's the same with marketing. You might try a few different forms of social content, one will hit, and then you'll double down on it. I think it's a pretty applicable principle across all of hospitality. Is you've just got to try loads of different things, and if something does land, don't go on to the next thing. Just keep going on that until the effect's maximized.
Yeah, you're building confidence through paying attention to the details, right? Like you're building confidence in your team and your investors and what that looks like, but you're still, the 5% isn't the magic and the guest choice and the autonomy on the experience or the stay, right?
And presumably you have to be unafraid of trying new things and things falling flat as well, right? To stumble on the great stuff. So, the conversation cards might have gone down like a lead balloon, Nathan, but you wouldn't have known unless you tried them, right? What's your next takeaway, Nathan?
Man, one that I just love, and I think it's part of the TED Talk that he gets into, but it discusses quite a bit in this. And we implemented it, and maybe because I felt like I knew him enough that we could just keep the same word, and it goes to the idea of this investment you have to make. It's not just, there's certain things you can do that are easy, but the investment to build into this idea is the whole concept of having dreamweavers on your team, that their focus is the people that are coming into this space, and you're going to do all you can to figure out what you can do to make them feel a certain way. And we had at Bolt Farm, we had a gal who'd been there for a long time, started as a housekeeper, kind of did a bunch of different roles, but the one thing she loved most was like doing these unique things for guests. And after we read this book, like essentially we got her the autonomy to like, all right, that's your focus, is to create the unique experience, whether we know something about them or, we did things. We'd learn something from the one spouse so we could surprise the other, or, what we learned from conversations in social media. And she just kind of had a budget, and she had the autonomy to like, all right, go wow and surprise and delight. And we just took the idea of the Dream Weaver and we just said, hey, we're going to call it the Dream Weaver because we all read the book. And so I think just that the importance of this is an investment. Like if you want to invest in creating unbelievable experiences, but also this unreasonable hospitality perspective in your business, like there's going to be a moment investment. And I recently heard him on a podcast talk about like, if you were a product developer and you were just creating products, you're going to have to make the investment into developing that product. And he kind of related to his investment into the Dream Weaver the same way. It's like, if we want to invest and have this product of hospitality, at some point you just have to make an investment into it and actually go for it.
And do you want to just explain what the concept of the Dreamweaver is in the book?
Yeah, so the idea of the Dreamer is he hired someone that they would be fully focused on paying attention, listening, taking the cues from the staff around the team of what they heard and actually making the magic happen. Like, so an example of, you mentioned the story, or like one of the stories is like, a family missed out on their beach vacation, and they heard about the trip, and they came in and brought sand and beach chairs and Bud Light, and they created a little beach at their table because they missed the flight to their beach vacation. And so this person's basically was the person, because if you're a leader at some point, like, yeah, when you're first starting, like you have to be the Dreamweaver, the GM, the sales and all that. But at some point when you don't have the time to do all the tasks with that. And so he brought someone in who's like, all right, your job is to make the dreams happen for our guests. And so they were just the ones that were executing most of the time what the other people on the staff are hearing. And they would go further. I mean, he kind of mentioned, they would sometimes go to the level of like, look on social media and look at all this. Cause their restaurant's a lot like more, what we are in hospitality is, who's coming. Like you take reservations, and so you can do some of that work before to figure out what makes them tick or what can make them feel special.
Well, you've said before that you've DM'd people when you're at Bolt Farm to create that community and obviously try and get them to book. So you have access to their social media in a non-creepy, stalky way. Like you can see what their interests are, what they like, what kind of what they might be looking for, and you tailor their stay around it, right?
And I think really the takeaway is for them, it was he hired one person. I don't know how many he ended up with, but the idea of like, you're going to put an effort with your team's resources, time, money, salaries. That's going to just focus on this. And maybe it's not their full-time focus, but it's the idea of like, these things do create bottom line revenues when you give them higher level experiences. And so it's just that making that commitment to that is what really the Dreamweaver idea is about.
Jacob, would you describe yourself as a Dreamweaver?
I would say that's hilarious because I definitely identify with Nathan said when you're the GM of a small property, you are the Dreamweaver and the doer. And I've removed myself out of that GM role and have put myself in the Dreamweaver role. So it's interesting to dream without thinking of ops, right? Because I think like for what they're doing, the Dreamweavers are just like executing and working with this autonomy. And then the restaurant GM is figuring out how it ties into the operations, right? So it is nice to specialize in that way.
And if you're in a position where you can have staff that specialize, presumably it's probably going to have to be a bit of a larger, resort maybe, or, a larger glamping site. Like by allowing that specialization, you can create that's what leads to those special experiences. Because if you were the GM and you had to worry about managing 1 million staff at Bishop's Lodge, you might not have had the time to go and get the Gatorade for the kid, right? But it's you're only able to do it because you were freed up and you were specialized to do that role.
And you know how many times I got that feedback early in my career where it's like, Jake, that is not what I need you doing right now. Like, I need you to zoom out,
Yeah.
get out of the weeds, go up, go up, go up. You know, that was always my feedback. But when you really care, you can't help yourself. Like, you just really, like, it's a learned skill, and I'm still learning. Like, literally, I still will fail in the future by not getting out, 50,000 foot view enough. I think it's just like a real skill.
Well, that's a pretty good point to pick up my next takeaway, which is, and by the way, if you're listening to this, it might be useful, this episode, but you don't have to implement unreasonable hospitality. It might not be realistic. If you're going for the hands-off model, then, it's kind of difficult to reconcile those two things. But if you are looking to implement this model, and you do need staff, then you need to make sure that they're hospitable. 11 Madison Park didn't get to 3 Michelin stars by hiring a guy who was looking for work experience, who just wanted a job for the summer. The quote that Guidara says is, "We were looking for the kind of person who runs after a stranger on the street to return a dropped scarf, who stops by with a plate of cookies to welcome a new family to the neighborhood, or who offers to help carry a stranger's heavy stroller up the subway stairs. The kind of truly hospitable person, in other words, who wants to do good things, not for financial gain or some kind of karmic bump, but because the idea of bestowing graciousness upon others makes their own day better." And that's exactly what you were saying, Jacob, is you couldn't help yourself from being hospitable. It's just in your blood, and that's the kind of staff that, if you're trying to implement this model, that you need to be finding. And to me, it sounds like you need to apply for a job from Will Guidara, Jacob, from what you just said.
No, I mean, I just ran out the numbers, right? If you feel like it's going to cost $5 extra more dollars from a salary employee standpoint to retain that person, that is that person for your company, to go attract it, it's $10,400 on your labor costs without labor assumption. So let's just say it's 22% carry on like insurance and workers' comp. So it's about $13,000. And then look at how much you've refunded and how much you've given back, or how much you've comped in the future, and then tell me that cost analysis for that person. So this just like speaks to my core about retention and employment and hiring practices. I think Mendocino Grove hit this out of the park. I mean, we paid a premium knowing that we were a seasonal employee, so that our housekeeping team, our groundskeeper, our maintenance guys, our front office, our camp, I mean, I really felt like that brand did so good at taking care of their people in that way. But it's only because we could run the numbers on it. And I'm like, what's the alternate? Please tell, like, have these earnest conversations with the ownership team. I said, because let me show you the math on this emotional decision.
I think, going from the world of e-commerce, like, and it's kind of taken a similar idea, like when you brought in the people that, especially in the customer support world, like, hey, the ones that are going to engage your customers, like when you brought in people that had an understanding and empathy, but also gave them a little bit of autonomy to make things move, like the amounts of chargebacks and returns for an e-commerce company are so drastically less than when you just provide a service. Or if you find different ways in that world of just caring a little bit more and they feel heard, like your drastic numbers in returns and then repurchases is so wildly higher that it's like, yes, it's worth that person or worth that service or worth that budget, because that little budget is going to save you and all this other expenses that could come down the line.
Yeah, Nathan, obviously Seth and Tori at Bolt Farm have a very public profile. They are Bolt Farm Treehouse for a lot of people. And they really will set high expectations for their guests, that they will be looked after and it'll be really hospitable because of the stuff they say and they do on their social media. So presumably it was pretty important that you could find staff to actually implement that to the levels that guests came in expecting.
Yeah, I mean, when you have the social following that you do and you kind of set the standard before they show up, you have to meet it. And so I think that's in this world of like social media, and we do have the Kristen Calavaris and celebrities showing up and posting about it. Like, and you just have that expectation. Like, it's the expectation is to meet what the guests had in their mind before they showed up, right? And not just to meet it, to exceed it. And that's where the hospitality comes in, because people already have their expectations of the amazing view and the amazing amenities. So what's going to take that? It's going to be how they feel cared for and the experience they have. And so it took I mean, and that's kind of where you can feel know that that was being done, because you look at the reviews and people are like, all right, they are being taken care of in a way that they feel that it's a 5-star. But yeah, and almost there's more pressure if you're going to have the beautiful, sexy social media brand, because you have to live up to that. And I think you live up to it by doing and that's the way Bolt Farm did. I know, like you said, some brands are going the opposite of people, but you mentioned that, like, I still think there's ways you can take the idea of unreasonable hospitality into a non-contacted resort that makes the guest still feel a little bit more one size fits one.
Yeah, Ben would argue that. Ben would argue that he's got enough customer service
Yeah.
reps on retainer that at any point he can coordinate communication from the back end to make it happen.
That is actually one thing that I remember. I remember speaking to him probably over a year ago now. And this is Ben Wolf of Venera, by the way. He was on a couple of weeks ago, board member at Posh Outdoors. Wink, wink. And I think their aim basically was, if a prospective guest made an inquiry on their website, that they would get a reply like instantly. And they do that by having a lot of staff on retainer in the Philippines, as Jacob mentioned. And yeah, I suppose that is a form of hospitality, is making it feel like you're going to get an instant response and that you're being heard, rather than having to wait 2 days to find out if you're allowed to bring a dog, for example.
Yeah, and he's allocating resources to that to get the best customer service. But I mean, I think it is a big part of the theme of the book, is to take care of your people, right? And that's your employees and that's your guests. And like, that should be a core, lesson to building.
Presumably, well, before we go into taking care of the people, back to finding people, Jacob, you will presumably interviewed a lot of people trying to be hired in these hospitable roles as you're the GM. What were you looking for, and what did you find that went translated from the interview process and the job application to an actual really good member of staff who did have those principles of hospitality and applied them?
Yeah, great question, Nick. It's like, I think when you feel like you're really tuned into what the brand is, you kind of, it's like,
Yeah.
type of feeling, right? Like, honestly, my interview process is pretty boring, because I'd rather just have a casual conversation with someone and kind of just pick up on some small cues, right? Like, how good are the active listening skills? Also, are they courageous enough to cut you off a bit? Like, because I want some stakeholding, so I'm looking for cues of like natural stakeholding, and person's pride and level of their personal pride should translate to their pride of work, right? So examples of that in their interviewing process, I try to look for. Also, it's just like, if the better the employee knows themselves, the better the employee is going to be for you. And I think that in my personal career trajectory, that's maybe where I failed, right? Where I'm like still growing and learning a little bit about who I was as a leader in my early 20s. It probably wasn't an appropriate time, to be going through those learning cycles and leading a company, right? But I was given a lot of grace. But I think that those are two things that I really look for, is like, how well does that person know themselves, right? And how comfortable are they with themselves? And then, are they giving you cues of stakeholding or pride? And you could do a lot with those two pieces.
So when you say knowing themselves, do you mean you're like knowing their own strengths and weaknesses and their communication methods and all of that?
Yeah, and I think just knowing what to share, what not to share. Also being very clear and transparent about, hey, honestly, I'm a morning person, right? And I know this interview is a PM job. So, like, just don't apply for the PM job if you know your peak hours of performance are from 6 to 11, right? Like, I think physiologically that's important to know, a circadian rhythm, a life rhythm. Yeah, I think just being aware and projecting into the future, right? Like, oh, I know that My family goes on vacation in October every year. If someone says that to me in an interview, I'm like, thank you. You know yourself, you know your rhythm, you know your calendar. I can work with that. So I think those are some examples.
And Nathan, I'm due to go to you for a takeaway, but this sets up too perfectly for one of my takeaways, which is the importance of listening to people on the ground. I think, in the book, Guidara kind of, where he whenever he went wrong, it was from trying to implement principles from a top-down perspective, where he only sees kind of, obviously he's in the business day in, day out, but he doesn't know what it's like to be in the kitchen. He doesn't know what it's like to be the one actually serving the guests day in, day out. And so kind of his takeaway from that is you've got to listen to the people at the coalface, but not only do you have to listen to them, you've got to empower them to be able to speak. Because I think it's a default mode for a lot of employees in general to just assume that they're employees. They can't speak up, they can't give advice, or make recommendations to the people above them. But that's, again, the only way that you're going to get those insightful recommendations is by knowing what it's actually like on the ground. And that's by listening to your staff and making sure that they feel listened to. So I'm sure both of you have got plenty of kind of insights into that.
Yeah, one of the things you wrote, and it goes to like almost the timing of your listen when you first engage employees. But he's talking about so it says the first time someone comes to you with an idea, listen carefully, because how you handle it will dictate how they will choose to come to you in the future. So just the idea of and when that team member comes to you that first time, be careful, because if you listen, kind of brush it off, they might not think they can bring other ideas to you or other concerns because they're not going to even pay attention. So it's like that. It's that pressure to some level as leaders of how you need to be present with your team, and it's hard when you're as a leader, you're having to juggle a lot of things, and you have a lot of other things that are sometimes bigger issues. But if you brush that one person off, that one person who has a great idea might never ever share it because they felt like you're not going to listen. So it's listening.
I can speak to that from the employee's perspective. When I started working for Glampitect UK, when it was just a UK business, I started working, I was only part-time, I was just doing a bit of content and marketing work. And I think kind of what helped me move up through that business is just because I wasn't really afraid to make suggestions or say, hey, I think this could be done better. Whereas I think most people are very afraid to do that, or they just don't even think to do it. And the first time I made a suggestion, I can't remember what it was, to Callum, the owner of that business, it was he was very receptive. Maybe it was a good idea, and he was like, yeah, we'll run with it, whatever. And then from there, it's well, okay, he's receptive to that. Then I'm just going to, anything that comes to mind that I think could be helpful, I'm going to, ping him. So, 18 months later, we co-founded the North American branch, and that was all because probably the first time that I made a suggestion to him, he was like, yeah, okay, let's run with it. And yeah, I think if it had been shut down straight away, then, put in my place as an employee, then, well, I certainly wouldn't be sitting here. Whether this is a good place to sit, I don't know, but I'm enjoying the conversation. Nathan, you got any other takeaways from the book?
He has multiple stories of how, employees that came in as, bus boys or bus girls or whatever in the name of the right term for that, but basically came up with that, but were passionate about something, passionate about coffee, passionate about craft beer, and how, he gave them, and he talks about quite a bit in different ways, but giving people responsibility before they're fully ready for it sometimes. And he talks just, so the one story of one of the entry level runners was super into beer, and he wasn't happy with their beer selection. And so instead of, bringing in somebody really expensive or trying to do it himself, he gave this kid or younger employee who was super passionate about craft beers, hey, you got the keys to our craft beer selection. And then I think that individual ends up being at some point head of bar, and then later is, one of his main people. And it's just that idea of I think the creativity that you can get from your team and employees when you tap into their passions, you can oftentimes find ways to bring that passion into your business, and it's going to have an impact.
I think the beer selection ended up winning an award, I think, from memory. Mm-hmm. So there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, just like, and it's okay to like hire someone that's not in the right spot and move them out of that spot. I mean, I think it's kind of this archaic pride point. I think he speaks about this a little bit in that, like, no, you don't just rush to fill a position because you need a body. But in that same theme is, if you have a really incredible person and you've identified that you've put them in the wrong position, move them to the position in the company that will better suit them. I think being agile or being creative with your team members and people's strengths and weaknesses are gonna like evolve, right? And that just like, so if you're seeing this evolution, then why wouldn't you also evolve that person's job responsibilities to match their new skill set? So I think like that's like, as you talk about development and employee development, just like reminding yourself that it's okay, people evolve and their skill sets will evolve, and you should evolve that position to match or move them to a different position.
He says at one point it's a leader's responsibility to identify the strengths in people, no matter how buried that strength is. And so sometimes it's, especially when you're hiring for culture and you're hiring for that, and like, hey, they're not going to have the full strength in maybe what they're in yet, because you're hiring them because of who they are often. Like, it's that leader's job to actually elevate and cultivate that strength.
I've definitely been the benefactor of people giving me the opportunity before I was quote unquote ready. Yeah.
I mean, you used the word evolve, Jacob. I think that was another real constant theme of the book, and it was eye-opening for me as well, because I'd read Setting the Table by Danny Meyer. That was my only other kind of insight into the high-end restaurant world, and I found it really interesting how constantly they evolve the menu, they evolve the guest experience, they evolve the whole concept of the restaurant, and they really weren't afraid of completely changing the formula. Even after things were going well, they thought, okay, we've hit a ceiling, we need to take it to another level. And it didn't always go right when they evolved, but they were never afraid to do it. And I think maybe there's an idea in there with a glamping or a unique stay is your guest experience isn't set in stone, and in fact you're probably doing something wrong if it's the same on day one as it is in year 5, and maybe you shouldn't be afraid of completely changing the formula, and kind of trusting that your guests will go with it.
I think, yeah, Mendocino Grove was very good at that. The owner, specifically Teresa, though it's a husband and wife team, but she truly was the vision in the brand, like on the back end, but she was also like not stuck in being like, hey, Jake, from the ops side, if this isn't working, then here's the vision. What does the ops version look like? So it's a really like good way to balance each other. But like our glamping example specifically, we used to have units that had bunk beds in the units. So for like families that have 4 kids, that was perfect, right? Each kid got a bed, and then it was furnished with a queen. It was not working for housekeeping. Like the housekeepers were like busting their knuckles on the bunk beds, like to climb to the second, and we did full linen service, right? I was just like, oh, my cringe. Like it just, and I knew like they were like not complaining about it, but I was like, this is not working. So that was a big decision to pull those bunk beds, because technically we're alienating 20% of our families that have 4 kids and not 2 kids, right? And then we were just putting 2 twins in. But zoom way out, at the end of the day, you're glamping. So the cots for the 6-year-olds, they don't care. They did not notice, right? They got a cot, they got a sleeping bag, a pad. It was warm, a little extra love on that bed, and it doesn't feel different, right? But from an ops standpoint, it was amazing. So that's my glamping example of like changing, year to year or whatever.
And that change came from listening to your staff, as we mentioned earlier.
And just like thinking of the OSHA complaints of like what happens when they're climbing bunk bed ladders.
Yeah.
We at Bolt Farm, right as I was leaving, kind of had a similar. We had one unit that was kind of the family that had a huge bunk bed. And there was, at the time, Bolt Farm had 20 units. This was the one family unit that it was just harder to sell, a lot less people. And we're sitting here like but we felt like for the few people that did come and actually have used the whole family, it was important to keep it until it was a spot. It's like, but this is not even who we are. We have to evolve to what essentially Bolt Farm became, which was couples. And so as I left, we transitioned the one unit that was for families and kind of had to say like, sorry, this is not, and they just transitioned it into what was the most requested thing from guests. And that was a place to get massages. And so now it's kind of like the first little spa. But I think that was, especially when you own something, it's difficult to say goodbye to your original idea and have to reinvest it. When you put time, energy, dollars into something, say, no, for this to grow, it needs to be different.
I was lucky. The owner's like, yeah, Jake, go ahead, take them out.
Yeah. The owners at Bolt Farm were saying too, they're like, sweet, a place for spa versus having to deal with kids. But
yeah, we have so many family units. We just took the bunk beds and put them back to 2 twins, and that was just easier.
Did you get any backlash from the decision, Nathan? Like as a company?
Yeah, there were families, that they had came up quite a bit, and then there were people that even in the level of families that had booked it, but in order for it to shut down and be transitioned into that, we had to like change the reservations, because people were booking it for a year plus in advance, but we wanted to make a change. So we had to, there was some, like I said, there was some backlash. It was majority, since most of the guests are couples, there was more excitement than when you're able to give a real reason and be human in your response and not just corporate, I guess, with Seven Toys, since there's so much involved in the brand, just being human with that, I think has allowed it for some flexibility.
There'll be a lot of people listening to this looking to get into this space who have never experienced any kind of backlash on social media, and are scared of it, and it's obviously a pretty natural reaction. No one wants to be shot at, but it sounds like if you're going to operate a business like this and you are going to evolve and try and take yourself to the next level, that it's inevitable. So what kind of would your methods for dealing with, both personally being able to deal with getting shit from people, but also as a business, and kind of meeting it and getting over it? How would you kind of deal with it?
Who wants to go first? As I'm crying still.
Yeah.
I just don't think that I've gotten over it yet.
We all got over the headset troll.
No, the headset troll is still deep in my head right now, in my heart. No, I think guests want to be in on the why, right? And I think you can eloquently speak to that. Like, for example, with the bunk bed guests who have, Mendocino Grove was built on family tradition, and that will not change. So it's hard when it's looped into your tradition as well as a returning guest. But my response was, what we were allowed to do when we took the bunk beds away is that those twin beds got heated mattresses, right? Which was not possible from a cord management standpoint when they had the bunk beds. So at least at that point, the kids went from being in bunk beds without heated mattresses to being in twin beds and cots that were heated blankets and heated mattresses. So we were able to substitute a 1-to-1 for that specific example. In general, you're just listening. You're just getting to the root of like what the actual complaint or barrier to a successful stay is, right? And 8 out of 10 times, I'm not going to say 9, but I'll say 8 out of 10 times, it has nothing to do with what the original issue or feedback or criticism was. You just dig a couple layers deeper and you're like, oh, it's bigger than that. So let's kind of rework the whole stay, right? Like, because even if I accomplish one of these things for you, the other 3 are outstanding. So I'd rather allow the guests to participate in the process, improve your active listening skills, and then let them in clearly, transparently on the decision pathway. And they don't have to agree with the decision, but at least they have the why behind your making the decision.
So could you just go into a little bit more of, an example of where you'd receive a specific individual complaint, but you've actually realized, they're complaining about something bigger here. Like, have you got an example you can point to?
Let me see. Specific example, I'm not sure, but a lot of a lot of what the trajectory of a guest stay is determined on is things out of your control, and usually it's happened on the drive in, right? Because like, and we used to tell that to our team members all the time. It's like, we do not know how that car ride went. So let's just start there. So, so what we really try to do is like see the check-in process as the start line. Yes, there was pre-arrival and reservation details and collection of information and some, you know, if something didn't go well through a reservation process, I really tried to tell the team it starts at check-in, and then so guests would come in and be like, man, you know, do you need to take a beat before we do this check-in? It seems like you got a lot going on in the car. You're also wanting to know a lot about your stay. But in my personal opinion, and I'll tell this to guests, I just don't think you're in the right place to receive this information yet. So which is like,
I love the boldness.
Yeah, because I don't know, that's just my personality on that.
Yeah.
So like, I just think you really need to be conscious about, is the guest in a space that they can even hear you? And if they're not, then goal number one is to shift them into that space, literally either physically, mentally, emotionally, right? So I think you have to connect on a different level.
I'm just trying to picture Jacob trying to shift an angry Karen who's had a nightmare car journey into a different space. See how that goes.
I mean, I'm literally just walking that guest somewhere else, and we're talking and walking. We are getting endorphins flowing. Yeah. We are pumping physical chemicals and endorphins, and we are exercising together, and that's what we're doing. That doesn't, because I think in my mind I've been that angry mom before, so it's pretty easy for me to click in. And I grew up on the East Coast with like helicopter moms, so like I'm good with that personality. It's the people that shut down that I can't. Like, if you're giving me something, I can work with that. If I've got nothing, then that's a harder guest. I don't know, Nathan, if you agree with that statement or not.
I mean, it is difficult, and it's difficult depending on, going back to like your own self-awareness of like taking it personal versus taking it for just the feeling that they're experiencing in that moment, and being able to navigate that. I mean, Will in the book talks about the idea, a couple different spots, but the idea of being right is irrelevant sometimes, and then also their perception is your reality, and sometimes you just have to deal with that in a way that's obviously empathetic, but doesn't mean you're giving away the house. Just because you make a change doesn't mean all of a sudden they get, a month stay and everything else. You still can hold down as long as you respond in a way that's, I love the idea of being part of that in ways of like, we're just going to zigzag this and kind of get it moving in a different direction, and then come back to it. And there's especially if you're hands-on in the resort, there's probably a lot of ways. Take them to the bar, take them to the scenery, get them outside to look at the view, and then we'll do check.
Give me something, people. Give me some sort of emotion. Yeah. No, but that just means they care, right? And
yeah.
Just like, so I'm like, I'll never be upset about a guest that paid attention, that cared, that did their research, that knows their unit type they're supposed to be in, that understands, that have read every review and knows that the experience that they're having right now is atypical to the brand and the level of service that we want to provide. And I'm never going to hold that against someone. And that is an amazing stakeholding from a guest that I will feed, and we will eventually get that back on track.
And presumably you've got to be at least content with the idea that there will always be someone who is never happy or never satisfied, and no matter how much logic, no matter how much empathy you show, you're never going to win them over.
I don't know, staring at a fire with s'mores in your hand. I mean, if you're not there, then we're never going to get you there,
I think you're right. There comes to some point where it's like, you're not going to allow someone to, I would allow someone to come to my front door and just shout at me. Even if I've done what I can, there comes to a point like I can't do anything for this person. And sometimes there is like a level of cut off that you're like, man, I can't do anything for you anymore. Like, we've tried. And in the case of social media and all that, there's just buttons you can push to be like.
I think the brands fail in which they assume that their line level employees are going to have that conversation with the guests, right? Like, if you're allowing your front desk to be in that level of detail and a conversation that takes that high emotional intelligence to get through, you have failed your employees in that way. So at that point, it needs to be escalated and elevated, right? Because then the message that Nathan's sending is genuine. Like, sir, you are speaking to the person that has the most autonomy in this company. And I care about your experience more than you may even care about your experience, honestly. This is my livelihood. And when you're looking someone in the eye and saying, this is my livelihood, and I am committed to doing everything that I can do to make this better for you, but I don't have the solution that is satisfying that need for you, I am sorry. And then you do have to shelve it sometimes.
Well, the way you just delivered that, I thought that was great. Like as an example of how to deal with something like that. I thought it was brilliant. I have one final takeaway. It's a bit of a shift, but I think it's the importance of standards in your business. I mean, this goes for any business. I get annoyed when I'm at the gym and I see something that, if I was the owner of that gym, I would never let slide. And I think a lot of businesses, and, it would be the same in hospitality, is a lot, let the little things go and don't care enough about creating, it's not their livelihood, like you say, Jacob. Some people might own a business, but they don't care about it as deeply as you might as the GM. And I think, it's a common theme of a lot of the operators I've spoken to is, the likes of Big Noel, they're constantly looking at the guest experience and figuring out how they can improve it. They're listening to guests, they're listening to their staff. And, it's the same with Guidara in the book, is he wouldn't have got to the best restaurant in the world if he wasn't constantly, didn't care so deeply and have those standards and make sure that everything was right. And I don't expect any glamping or unique stay operator to have the kind of standards that a 3 Michelin star restaurant would have, because I think, it comes with a hell of a lot of stress and probably, difficult at times for the employees. But that principle of caring, observing, ideating and iterating, I think is everything to any business, let alone any hospitality business. You have to care about the little details.
I'm trying to capture my thoughts here exactly in agreement. And I think, you mentioned owners or GMs, and there's that level of like, how do you take that level of ownership, whether it's financially ownership or just pride ownership, and passing that through to your team and that's the tricky part, is you can care so much, but you can only get your employees to come up to a certain point because it's not theirs. But how do you get them to care and take ownership of things from, in the glamping world, and you have a team, like the thing that was, how do you take pride in like, yeah, let's pick up that. If you see something on the ground that shouldn't be there, or something's out of place, fix it, or pick up that trash and put it away. Or if you see a guest needing something, just go do it, or wave or smile and just take that little bit of pride. But if you're not, sometimes it's hard to get that level of detail and care passed down to your entire team when they are just a frontline hourly waged employee.
Yeah, well, presumably some of that is the culture, but again, it goes back to hiring hospitable people. Is some people will be inclined to pick up the piece of trash on the ground, some people will walk away, and I suppose you have to find those people that will pick it up and then ingrain that culture, so that maybe you've got, because you're never going to get A players like every time. You're going to have the odd B player, the odd C player who maybe isn't as inclined to pick up the trash. But if you've got enough A players who really do care, then maybe the standards kind of transmit, and you create that culture that does it.
There's a book called The Hospitable Leader, and I forget the author's name, but one of the things, and it's of all the book, that's like the one quote that I can stick around, but it's the idea of you can't expect your team to go with you there. The idea of you can't expect them to go with you on this crazy idea, holding up these crazy standards, if you first don't welcome them here. So the idea of like, you can't expect them to go there unless they feel welcome here. And so I think it just starts with that idea of hospitality. Like, you have to make sure your team feels welcome at the basis of who they are and what they are doing. And if they do that, they'll be willing to go with you where you want them to go.
Beautiful. Nathan, have you got any final takeaways?
It's more of like an actual takeaway that we can all take away is, we talk about these big ideas, they bring in a Dreamweaver, they bring on that, but how as a small business can you actually do some things that are unreasonable? And he gets into the idea of like just creating a little toolkit, create something that's kind of this standard menu of options that you have that you can pull to provide those surprisingly light. And I think that's something that no matter how big your budget is to do this, you can create kind of that standardized toolkit that gives you enough flexibility to make, whether it's special moments for your team, special moments for your guests coming into your stay or in your property. But the idea of actually like spending a little bit of time and building out your internal menu of options. One, it's just a great exercise, but then two, like then you can give your team kind of the autonomy to be creative to some level when they know like, hey, you don't get the whole kitchen to come up with an idea, but you get this one cupboard that has these things, and creating that toolkit of unreasonable hospitality options, I think is such an easy thing to take home and execute on.
And it systemizes it as well, right? Like it's hard to implement a principle at a business if you're not able to systemize it. And if you create that framework for your staff to implement it, and you say, okay, if this happens, you can do this, and you've got these options, then it becomes a lot easier to do, and almost second nature, presumably. Instead of just kind of giving some vague ideas of, oh, by the way, if you overhear someone talking, then go and do something that kind of shows that they've been listened to. Cool. Are we about done, gents?
I think, did we cover the whole book? Did we get through the whole book?
Yeah, I mean,
I think you did a great job of stretching out your 34 pages, Jacob.
There's a lot more concepts in there that I think I've taken and just like throw up on this wall, because it's like he did such a great job of just giving you like these ideas that can be summoned into like 3 words, and they're just such great reminders of like slowing down to speed up, things like that are just such great little nuggets to remind yourself of. And I think that's the one of the, regardless of your industry, is it's a you can take away a lot of different little things.
Yeah, I mean, this is coming up in our like daily rallies. Our general manager loves this book, and we talk about it often, and we try to pull examples, because there's an expectation, and because this is my first foray into luxury, like all the other things in lifestyle, which you're like, give yourself a pat on the back, like good job, we did that. That's assumed, right, in this next level of category. So it's just like the specialization of like building these little systems around the surprise and delight, as you said, and allowing all your team members to have access to this guest and the stakeholding to the guest.
Yeah, and obviously we would recommend anyone that reads the book if they're interested in learning more. We all well, 2 of us really loved getting to the end of it. Sorry, Jacob, I'm giving you a hard time today.
So click the link in the bio so that all purchases go to Nick's pocket.
Yeah, buy me a beer. But actually, what I'd prefer, rather than people doing that, although they can if they want, if the Amazon affiliate stuff works, is we'd love feedback on the new format of the podcast. We're really pleased with how it's going, and listener numbers are doing reasonably well, and it feels good to have these conversations. I've absolutely loved it, but we love audience feedback. So if you have any comments on the new format, please email nick@glampytech.com. But that is the end of our first book club episodes. I really enjoyed it, gents, so thank you.
Can Nathan pitch? Nathan, do you have anything to pitch to us?
Yes.
I'd love a little pitch if you have anything that you're working on.
A pitch of what?
I don't know. What are you working on? What are you doing?
One thing to stay in the loop, and I mean, for the people on this, is this whole idea of hospitality beyond the industry and what it is from a posture standpoint is something that I've been really thinking about. And I guess this will be the first. Well, I've shared it with a few people, but I haven't fully launched it. But I was on a trip to Africa. I'll try to be as quick as possible. On that trip to Africa, I came back and I was just thinking about hospitality and what it is. And one of the terms that came up to me was the ministry of welcome, ministry of presence. That's what hospitality is. And so ministryofwelcome.com is a thing now. And here pretty soon, I'm just going to start putting my thoughts on how you bring hospitality into your home, your community, your business, your hospitality business, and some practical, but then also the posture. What's the posture look like? Because I think the more and more we can figure out as a industry, as a business sect, as anything, like the more we can figure out how to be hospitable to each other, I feel like we're going to be better off.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, I will make sure that that link is in the description of this episode. So go and check out Ministry of Welcome. That's the first book club episode done. I think we'll probably do another one. Really happy with it. So thank you, gents, and thank you for listening if you stuck around this long.
Appreciate you all.